Welcome once again to our very last meetup of the year. Amazing, break a big. Yes. So welcome. So today I'll be sharing about more of an introduction to observability. And how Open Telemetry is set as an open source framework. Yeah. So today, again, I'll be introducing what observability is, some good practices behind it, um, and of course, opening with open telemetry, as well as some tools. And I'll be concluding the session, the talk, as well as if there's some time, I will give the floor to some Q&A. Yeah. So as you know, those who have heard me speak before, I like to include these inside, meaning to say, I do not want to give you false hopes that I will fully teach you observability for today. But what I want to introduce is the idea here and why it's important and how a painful experience back in one of my previous companies actually taught me why observability and using the tool of observability is important. Yeah, so introducing myself again, I'm one of the co-organizers of Junior Dev Singapore. You can approach me, talk to me, whatever, I'm very nice. Or you can just give me like constructive criticism. I would really love that. Of course, I love to do things for tech for good, and I love hiking, I love animals, as well as I travel a lot. I travel at least 5 times this year. Yes. Yeah, so let's get on to the topic of observability and what is really observability. So let's go to a world without observability. So imagine you're a user here and you're trying to do a cart checkout, right? And so the entire request flow goes from the gateway to the front end application, as well as to the cart checkout services, the currency exchange if needed, and the cart checkout, and of course, the payment services and the email notification to email your user. But the whole issue here, right, is if you look at this whole thing, it looks so simplified, right? And you can tell which services it goes to, but can you tell exactly which API endpoint in what service does the entire request flow go into? Probably not, right? Yeah. So that's why when each of these services, they also interact with their respective databases, right? Without having that ability, without having observability, you won't be able to see if, let's say, you own only one code base, which is the checkout service code base, for example, you won't be able to see what the team that owns the currency code base, as well as the checkout, the shopping checkout code base actually works on if you want to debug some error that happens to your user from the front end. And that's the issue of without having observability around. So yeah, again, let me screen the word observability, which essentially is broken down into 2 words, observe and the ability. So you're basically observing the internal state or the internal system that you're actually doing to the rest of your user. Yes, so if you are super blur about everything that I talked today, this slide is the most important slide. All right, so there are 3 concepts for you to learn. So first is traces, second is metrics, and the third is logs. So traces is basically, think about it, when you're tracing a maze on a paper, right, from the end to the start or the start to the end to get yourself out of the maze. So that's essentially what tracing is. And it's mainly used for debugging issues, as well as identifying points that could cause and where the data is to see where you can possibly debug some of your systems, and for example, why your user cannot onboard onto your application, or why the user cannot do a cart checkout. And second is metrics. So metrics include like how much you use in your CPU, how much memory you use, or the request count for a specific endpoint, or it depends on what metrics you actually set on your observability tool. And last but not least, for logs, we include that in our code base, right? And that's where the logging tools are attached to identify specific tools or events that happen within the phase or the course of the entire flow of the event. Yeah, so again, we are using the same example of when the user does a cart checkout or shopping checkout on an e-commerce application. So just to introduce the concept, the span is basically a whole block over here of each part of the pathway to actually note what in this amount of time, right, where the user is at and how much time is taken, as well as how long the request actually works, or what kind of configuration I should set for each part of my application. Now for the trace, like I said, to trace from the start to the end, you're actually tracing from the start to the very end, which is like your lower level, in this case, your database. And just to note later, I'll be using Jaeger UI later to show a bit of the trace context and what are some sample data that you actually see on the entire trace context. Yeah, and of course, to just show you this, you're like, haha, Melody, this is so simple, right? And what's the point of this, right? The whole point of this is just for me to trace, to know where things go wrong just in case, or how my flow actually works, especially for the case of developers, if I want to integrate a new feature or new flow into it, right? And so you ask yourself, right, but if I just have this and I'm just able to see everything, right? So it doesn't really make much sense to me, or it doesn't really add to my business. And that's why we introduced this idea of alerting, right? Because that's when you set proper metrics for your SRE team or your site reliability engineering team to alert or know when your applications are not working, and what are some of the causes of actions that you actually take to do, right? So here are some sample metrics that are commonly used in the industry. Firstly, the error rates, where you note where your database query failed. For example, like if you want to update a specific record on your database, right? Why does it fail, and what's the error count, right? That will tell you the severity of the error, and within what time frame you're actually looking at. And it's always good, it's always good practice to always set a good threshold by noting where your system is. And that's when you account to your product owner. The other one is latency or response time, sorry, because you want to look at some threshold that you're seeing from your request, and what's the timing that the response is returned to within that span of time, right? And of course, how much CPU you're using, because your company is, you want to keep things cost effective for your company. And of course, as we all know, as part of the entire distributed systems, it's always good to know availability, what's your uptime of the system, and how available are your users able to use the system, right? And that's when you include things like heartbeat checks, what's the health check status of your system, and of course, the very ever-changing problem that we all know as engineers is rate limiting. Yeah, that's when there are certain violations, and that's when you know how or what to adjust for your rate limiting. It can take like days just to discuss like one simple change for this, and it's actually not a simple change. And of course, depends on what your business needs. For example, for business, for payment companies like PayPal, they look at transaction volume. Yeah. So how do I actually set up alerts, right? That's when you actually use tools like Kibana, and then you send to logging, and then you can project it onto Slack, which actually shows or beeps on your phone every day for alerts. It's very annoying, right? How many on-call engineers over here got that? Come on, you guys! Seriously? How many logs? I mean, to be honest, thank you to BetterStack. Thank you to BetterStack. I get called like 1 a.m. When I was in my previous job. Thank you, BetterStack. So, yeah, this is how annoying alerts are, but they're an absolute necessity to actually look at why and where the request points do not work, or what flow do you actually look at, right? For example, if you try and register for SingPass, although you have an existing SingPass account, right? Like that's what happens to those who try and register for NDP tickets this year. Thank you to those who have alerted me. Yes, yeah, so that is it. So in wasting more time, let's go to Open Telemetry, which is essentially, oh, what? Slide skip. Here, what? Okay. Yeah, so let's go to Open Telemetry. Yeah, which is actually an open source framework. So it's easily configurable. Since I don't know where the slide actually went, I'll just then show you the docs, which is Open Telemetry over here, right? So what exactly is it? It's just a framework to actually help developers configure. And there are some concepts over here that they provide, like instrumentation and signaling, as well as it projects proper properties onto and proper metrics, like your sampling and distributions of it, onto your observability dashboard. And I remember there's this no code part. So let me just get to that. Right. So you could also use zero code implementation, right, from your Open Telemetry SDK to integrate it and then inject it into your application, which would allow telemetric data to be exported on from your application. Yeah. So that essentially is Open Telemetry and its entire framework. So to show a clearer picture of Open Telemetry, because I don't know where that slide go, is actually a collector to collect the telemetric data from your microservices or from your application, as well as from your infra team, to project telemetric data onto your various observability interfaces like Datadog, as well as what happens in your DB, like for example your DB query, like I mentioned just now, onto the entire dashboard. So yes, a very quick demo time of Jaeger UI, which effectively uses the examination of traces on Jaeger. So for example, over here, right, my system is, because this is just unfortunately a demo, so almost everything is positive. So latency, error rate, and requests over here, all these are metrics over here, right? So what you can see from here is some of the specific time frame that and how much latency of your application that you're experiencing, as well as what are some of the error rates, and of course the request rates. So let's view some of the traces over here. Oh, okay, yeah. So let's go to one of the microservice, which is your card service, for example. And I want to look back at the last 12 hours, for example, right? If let's say I want to work like all day, yes. Yeah, so these are known as the traces and what endpoints it calls from your front end, and how you label the specific trace points, right? And yeah, okay, this is not a very, very good example. Let's try and find a good example here. Yeah, so wait on, let me just do the checkout instead. Yeah, the checkout one is more clear. Yeah, so for the checkout service labels, because this is filtered by individual services. So for the demo, it managed to capture a lot more checkout service because my user might have done a lot more checkouts in the last 12 hours. Yeah, and basically what you're seeing here, the entire line that you're seeing here is basically the trace that you're seeing. And let me just open one of the tags. Let me just open one of the span endpoints to show you what are some of the telemetric data that is captured. For example, because this is run locally, right? That's when you know your process PID, as well as what are some of the services that are implemented here, and more importantly, production, right? That's when you know, okay, this endpoint is called also in the code service for the items that you code. They be called within your container ID as well as yes, as well as where it happens in your code also at the same time. But I guess the most important thing to know here, in any observability case, right, especially when you communicate with your colleagues or work with cross teams, like for example, teams that own different code bases, like I mentioned just now, right, is this trace ID, like we all say in, you know, like all ex-PayPal people here would know, we all say, what is your trace ID? Can you give me your trace ID? So this is the most important thing to know over here. So with this trace ID, yes, Victoria. yeah, actually just, oh yeah. This case you can't really find it, but this is like a part of the hash of the trace ID. Yeah, so unfortunately, because this is demo, it ain't that clear, but when you see it on like proper production, then that's when you know everything just becomes clear. Yeah, so yeah, the trace ID is always the most important thing to always give your colleagues or your tech lead in case anything you want to account to your manager or whatsoever, like they want proof. So all these data points in observability is very important. And that's also another point on why we have observability, so that you're able to work in cross-functional teams more readily. Yeah. And yeah, so lastly, I'm talking about some tools that you want to know. For example, some tracing tools like Datadog APM, Splunk, right? Which uses SignalFX. And also more importantly, what is commonly used is also the ELK stack on how you actually push your various traces onto it. And yeah, there's also AWS CloudWatch, and of course, Mr. Better Stack and Azure Monitor. Yeah, so like I said, if you can't remember anything that I mentioned in the past, how long? 10 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes, right? There's always these three concepts to always remember about observability, because you want to know what's in your system, you want to know the internal state of your system, where things go wrong, and yeah. Of course, you can refer to all these resources like the open telemetry documentation, as well as the GitHub demo that they have, and the various SDKs that you can use to do for manual instrumentation and auto instrumentation. Yes, and credits to Michael, Max, and my friend Rashida, who is not here today, for vetting my slides, and Tim, who is also not here, for making me do the painful job of integrating observability to make me understand why. And Michael Cheng, who says why tech leads are frustrated by it. And yeah, that's it. Feel free to connect with me, or if you feel that I ain't giving a good talk, yeah, just hit me up. Thanks. Yeah. So any questions? Do we have time? Yeah, time for questions? Yeah. Yeah. Going once, going twice.
Questions? Have you got any questions about observability? No?
No. Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
Your turn.